sheet, 39 pages that we got from MDE, thousands of lines. So what this presentation do, will be taking that information and summarizing it for you, and so you don't have to go line by line of 39 pages. So once again, a lot of this stuff is set in statute, so I'll try to point that out as we go. Law does require us to conduct a truth and taxation public meeting, and we must allow the public to speak. As you know, mail notices were sent out to all property owners within our county that describe the proposed tax levies. And then the second part of the law regards these meetings here that must be held between November 24th and December 30th, be held after 6 p.m. or later, and the public must be allowed to speak. So after my presentation, Joel will ask for any comments or questions, and then at that point there will be a ask for you to do a resolution. Please, if I go too fast, ask me to slow down. If you have questions throughout the presentation, please ask as well, because it can get quite confusing. So the next slide talks about the school district property tax process. There's 6 basic steps for the property taxes, and the school district is step 5. All the 4 steps prior to step 5 are things that we have no control over. So the city or the county assessor determines things, legislature sets formulas, you know, the auditor calculates tax capacity, MDE sets levy limits, and then finally you, the board, get to do what you do. So it's a complex routine and process, and hopefully by the end of this presentation you'll have a better understanding of that and what it means for our school district and our community. Many factors can cause a tax bill for an individual property owner to increase or decrease. Change in value of the individual property, change in total value of all property within our district. So even though maybe where you live, maybe your value might have gone down or up based on what it is, it also looks at the total value of all property within your district. And then once again, any increases or decreases in amounts of levies due to state funding changes and voter approved referendums or other factors. Although I always told Jamie this is my favorite picture I found a couple years ago. Yeah, they're just so darn cute, so I don't really know why it's in there, but very cute. Once again, basic education formula and equalization. Back in 1993, there was a change to how we are funded. It should work in principle, but since 2003, neither the basic formula nor the equalization factors have kept up with inflation and market values. So when that happens, as this next chart shows, our per pupil, what we get per pupil, if we would have kept up with inflation all these years, it would have been $8,645 per pupil. Instead, our amount is $1,364 per pupil, less than that, just the way it is. What happens though is, remember last year the legislature set an automatic inflation increase up to 3% for going forward. That should help us keep that up with our inflation as long as inflation isn't more than 3%. But we all know that inflation is more than 3%, or has been right now. So please keep that in mind as we go through this. But it will also take additional dollars on the formula to close this gap here between what the inflation rate should be and what we're at. This talks about just the difference between school and non-school property tax levies. The school districts account for a significant portion of overall property tax levies, but the blue line shows that our increase has been a lot lower than some of the county and cities. That's all this slide shows. And the green is just a statewide property tax on commercial and district property. But this just shows that other parts of tax levies have increased a lot more than school districts. This is, once again, on a statewide. This is not Windom only. Another thing that we always talk about, as you're aware of, underfunding of special education. Back in fiscal year 2022, so that's about 3 years ago, we were underfunded by $712 million. Due to changes in the special education cross-aid subsidy, that has improved. But by fiscal year 2027, which is only 2 years away, we're still going to be underfunded by $408 million. So good news is that it's improving. Bad news that it's not fully funding what all our entire special education cost is for our students that are on IEPs. So, next thing is explanation of the tax statement. We have two different types of voter-approved levies. As you all know, we have an operating referendum levy of $613 per student, and that will expire in tax year 2029. That was a 7-year operating referendum. And then we also have a debt service levy for the new elementary and the CTE expansion remodel, which will expire in 2039, and the tax abatement bond, which did the parking lots for that, expires in 2031. There are also different types of other state-approved levies that, you've heard these terms. I've talked about these terms a lot, LTFM, QCOM, Career and Tech, Operating Capital. These are other types of levy that you'll see when you go through, if you went through the 39 pages, you'll see listed in there. Some are a lot higher than others, and we might get more aid or more levy based on certain things, but this is a list of the ones that we use. There are other ones out there that we do not have. The next thing that we must talk about is that we must talk about our next fiscal year 2026. Once again, always remember our money we get a lot of it is based on enrollment. So as our ADMs, we call it average daily membership, as that goes up or goes down, that really changes what our funding is. Other three things other than enrollment is market values and class rates. All of these can cause property tax increases or decreases based on what they do. Changes in market values. As we know, changes in market value are not under your control. And the other big thing on this takeaway is that the Ag to School tax credit, which you have known about for several years, it came about in 2017, is a huge impact for our tax base. So that's a great thing. Just as a reminder, Ag to School tax credit, it started in 2017, and they stair-stepped it in. It was like at 40% and then 50 and things like that. We have now been at our top credit percent of 70% for 2 years now. So once again, it's a good thing for our area. Whoops, I missed a slide. Finding your Ag bond credit. If you do have that Ag to School credit, it will show up right down here on your proposed tax statement. Where the red arrow is, and if there's nothing there, that means you don't qualify, hence you don't own any ag land. But that's where you can find it. Once again, this Ag to School credit, this is not a shift. This is paid directly from the state to our school district. It is covered by the state from income and sales tax, and because this is directly paid to us from the state, it does not show up on our levy certification report. So So even though it says that we're going to get so much money, you take the Ag to School credit off of that, and that's really what you get. So here's a list, and I know this is really, really, really tiny to see, but this shows that back in the 18-19 school year, we were at 40%, and then now we're at 70%. Last year, our Ag to School bond credit was $825,966. This year, it's estimated to be at $9,624. So once you can see, even though we're still at 70%, our Ag to School credit is still growing because the value of ag land is still growing. So as that ag land value goes up, your Ag to School credit is going to go up as well because of that. So if your market value ever drops, then you're going to see a decrease in this as well, because that 70% is in perpetuity for it, unless the legislature would happen to change something. So once again, 70% was at $825,966. This year it's at $909. So that's a roughly increase of $85,000. Another important one is market value. For our district only, our market value increased by 36.6% up from last year. Our referendum market value increased 14.6%. Remember, referendum market value is house, garage, and 1 acre. And then our adjusted net tax capacity increased by 19%. So keep that in mind as we go through the next slides, because these will show what's happening due to our market value increases. Change in class rates. These are set by the state, and class rates did not change from last year. These are just some of the more common ones. residential homestead, commercial apartment, and residential non-homestead. There's a whole list of different valuations and prices of ag land. So I just did the most common ones on here. And changes in enrollment. As you can tell, bar graphs are easy to take a look at. We are holding steady with our enrollment. If you can remember, when the auditor was here last board meeting, he talked about our enrollment was steady. Last year, our ADMs was 1174. Remember, this levy year is paid in 2020, tax in 2024, paid in 2025, and we will get the money in 2026. It's a 2-year process. And it's also based on our estimated enrollments for this year. And Jamie and I were just looking at the enrollments the other week, and she always updates you anyway at every board meeting or the first board meeting of the month. And we are currently setting our budget on 1195 ADMs. And you're going to say, wow, that's a little bit higher than the 1174 from last year. And that is because of VPK funding, or voluntary pre-kindergarten. We are estimating approximately 26 ADMs increase on that. That's causing the majority of our increase. We are serving approximately, we're serving approximately 1,134 students, K-12. And then if you add on students that are placed in other facilities or other programs, a few early childhood special education, that's how you get to the number of 1199. So one thing about VPK that we'll talk about when we talk about the budget for next year is that they're changing the rules on VPK because nothing ever stays the same. They're going to be more, I'll let you talk about that because you know that a little bit better.
So we finally received VPK funding, and now they're changing the rules on us. So there's going to be different criteria that a student would have to meet in order to qualify for VPK, such as free and reduced price lunch, you know, some other criteria that they haven't told us about. So it's going to be for the disadvantaged students, not every student. So we do have that estimated at quite a bit lower. And the other thing I'd like to mention about ADMs, remember ADMs are different than students in seats, right? The monthly reports that I give you are actual students in seats. ADMs are figured differently. Like Peggy said, they do encompass like students that are placed in different facilities, but also remember the students in grades 7 through 12 count as 1.2 ADMs. So they calculate more than a 1 ADM, whereas students in kindergarten through 6th grade equal 1 ADM. So there's this whole formula, and that's why when you look at an ADM number, it's so much greater than the numbers that I report to you every month because I'm actually reporting students in seats.
Thank you. Now we're getting to where we're discussing the numbers that are in that 39-page document. So this just shows an overall view of all that data in it. Between all the different levies, between what we refer to Fund 1, our community ed, and our debt service. Right now it is showing an increase of 9.05%. That is prior to the Ag to School tax credit, which is right here, the 909, which is in the red down there. So it is a large increase, but we're going to explain the reason for that over the next few slides. So if you can bear with me, some of these slides I'm going to say it makes more sense if you can just wait for the next slide because there's a lot of information. This slide is just talking about our general fund increases only because there's 3 different parts of the levy. We're going to look at the ones that have the largest change, so it's in that 3rd column that has a dollar signs of change. There's always some fluctuations based on enrollment and because of values. There's always going to be some fluctuations, but I'm going to concentrate on the large ones. When you look at that, I'm looking at the line, the second line down, called the referendum levy, which had an increase of $2,006,000, and the local option levy, which is an increase of over $92,000. Those are huge changes when you look at just dollar amount changes. There's slightly other changes which are normal because everything's always fluctuating, but those are the ones that we're going to talk about in one of the next upcoming slides to understand what's happening. All the other changes, yeah, there's some minimal changes, but when you talk about dollar amounts, you know, they're probably $25,000 or less, which is pretty common to have some fluctuation. The other one in there, that unemployment insurance, it's the one that's, 5 up from the bottom in the red. We're still dealing with adjustments due to COVID and how unemployment worked for COVID. This should be the last year that we have all this, but it does take, like I said, 2 years for everything to work through the system. So after that, we will be a lot normal, or more normal in that area. This next slide is the other two components. Community education, obviously composed of community ed and early childhood family education, and then debt service too as well. As you can see, the community ed, the variations are very slight, even though overall it's 11.41% increase, and debt service is just a really slight increase of 0.99%. Altogether, that's once again, you come up with that 9.05% increase, and then you throw in your Ag to School tax credit as well for those that qualify, and that is your dollar amount. Any questions so far? Now, remember how I talked about to keep an eye on referendum levy and local option levy and those amounts? What has happened is formulas set by the legislature are set to equalize. So when property values increase, there's an automatic shift from aid to levy, which will impact our local taxpayer. This chart is a chart we got from Ellers. Jamie and I have been meeting with Ellers for the last 3 weeks, trying to go through our tax document, trying to figure out what can we do to make this better. You know, that's a high increase. Why is it so much? Is there something wrong? Are the numbers correct? And it comes down to the numbers are correct, but what is happening because of this equalization, there is a shift from aid to levy. And this chart represents that. So when valuations is shifting from aid to levy, so even though the levy is showing 390,000 increase in levy, we, according to this chart, we're only getting about 23,000 more in money. When you look at this one in the total right-hand column, we are getting $242,000 in aid, but our levy increase is going up to $1,653,000. Look at the prior year, just right to the left. Prior year, we were getting $440,000 in aid and $1.4 million in levy. And then the lines below, that is a $198,000 decrease in state aid and a $222,000 increase in levy. So what that equalization factor is what they're doing is they're saying, because your market value has increased so much, remember back to that slide that said we had like a 36% increase in market value and it's 18 and 19? Because you're getting more wealth in your district, we are now going to shift money rather than give it to you in state aid. We are now going to pass that burden on to your taxpayers because they're more wealth in your area based on your market value. But we ourselves are not getting that much more revenue due to this shift. We are going in that equity, local option, and referendum. Once again, it's about 23,000. That's it. I had to have Ellers explain it to me several times because it was a really hard concept for me to grasp. But that's really what it lies with.
I think Peggy explained that very well, but a simple way to think about it is that, you know, the state is viewing our district as more wealthy today than we did than a year ago because our property value has gone up. And when property values go up, then the equalization factor kicks in and more of the levy comes from the local taxpayer instead of the state. And so it kind of does a shift. It's unfortunate. We don't have any control over it, but that's what we're seeing. And that's why we're seeing a 9% increase in our levy.
So then we asked Ellers, what can we do to decrease this? Because that's an increase we don't like to see. And the first thing they said is you got to be very careful when you do something called under-levying, because sometimes if you under-levy in certain areas, you start losing state aid in those areas as well. So we relied on Ellers to say, so we asked, okay, come up with a plan. What are some areas we can bring to the board to under-levy in to help lower this amount? We didn't like that 9.05%. So they came up with 4 different areas to under-levy in order to bring this down from over 9% to 7.75%. It's in 4 different areas. It's in first and second tier referendum adjustments, local option revenue tier 1 adjustments, and an equity adjustment. So all these adjustments add up to approximately right over $55,000. By under-levying in these 4 areas, though, we are able to drop that increase to 7.75%. And when I say under-levying, because we're doing these 4 areas, I'm also talking about we are deferring these to 2 years ago into our adjustments that you'll see in 2 years. At that point, the board will then decide, do we want to continue to under-levy in those areas? Or at that point, based on what else is happening in market values and enrollment, do we not under-levy and we continue on? Once again, it's just deferring them for 2 years. And then we'll let the board know what happens in 2 years with everything else going on. But once again, our recommendation is going to be under-levy in these particular 4 areas. And because I know you all studied that 39-page document line by line, and this is really hard to see, but this is the document. There's some that are 4 that are crossed out. Those are the lines that we are going to choose to recommend to under-levy in. Once again, they add up to approximately $55,000. So as you can tell, there's tons of lines on this report, but these are the ones that Ellers recommend, and after meeting with them several times, we concur with that. Those are the best ways to under-levy to bring that down for our district and our local taxpayers. Okay. Any questions on that at all? I think we've only under-levied 1 other time in my 15 plus years, so it's not something we do. And the reason why is because when you look at the last 14 years, other than that year right in the middle where the new elementary school and CTE bond hit, our average increase has been 1.49% over approximately 14 years. As you can tell, some years we've had some negatives. We've had lots of 1s and 2s. Back in 10, 11, 11, 12, we had a 6%, but we've been fairly consistent and fairly low, which we like. We don't take this lightly. But overall, our average is 1.49%. So our recommendation would be to you under-levy in these following areas, and I have the line numbers there and exactly what they represent for that total of $55,867.21, which prior to the ag to school tax credit will be an increase of 7.75% over the prior year. Any questions so far, or I'll let Jamie speak.
I think it's just important to note that our district is doing well financially, and this is a way that we can show our taxpayers that we can lower the increase for them. So instead of them paying a 9% increase, 7.75% increase is not great either, but it's better than 9%. And we feel that we can make the budget balance with this under levy. So it's a nice effort to show our taxpayers that we'll absorb some of this hit also.
All right, as required by the statute, we also must discuss our current year's budget this meeting, which is a little bit ironic because at the next board meeting, we'll be going over the revised budget as well. So this is gonna just be a very brief overview. We'll get into more details at the next meeting when the revised budget is presented. Once again, you all know there's different types of funds, general fund, community ed, and debt service are the main 3, but there's other things in there as well. You love my little pretty picture here. As you can tell, there's all different areas. We did have a really good year last year due to enrollment and other factors. There's also things like special ed revenue has been increasing, compensatory revenue is increasing. We did have some new restricted accounts that we got more money. VPK is good. So overall, we're in a good financial place, but we also have to be cognizant that, we're very conservative. We watch what we spend. We want to make good decisions for our students in our community, and we want to give our students a great education and be very diligent in how we spend our money. Prior to other years, our expenditure budget really hasn't changed from last year. These numbers between the general ed, community ed, and debt service are relatively the same. They might vary less than 1%. But, you know, I always talk about, you don't want the ebbs and flows. You want things to be fairly consistent. And this chart shows that. Unlike last year, our general percentage of expenditure was 87.09. This year's 88%. Our proposed general fund expenditure budget. Once again, this is where do we spend most of our money. Once again, it's fairly consistent. Most of our money go for our salaries and benefits of our employees, and then other is about 27.31%. Just for last year's, the other was 28.03%. Once again, very fairly consistent from year to year, which is what you want to see. So, prior to this, once again, our recommendation is to have a final proposed tax levy of the $4,651,104.47 under levying in 4 particular areas. Does not account for ag to school credit. But before we get to that, are there any questions from the board?
So thank you you ran this through the finance committee last week. And so we were able to answer a couple questions, and the one that I had that I just want to clarify for the rest of the board is why 7.75? Why not 6.8 or 8.2? 7.75 is the number where that's as low as we can cut it without losing state funding. So if we were to under levy in any other categories, we'd then start cutting into aid too. So 7.75 maximizes every dollar while minimizing as much as possible. That's where that exact percentage comes from. But any other questions from the board before we open it for public comment?
I was going to just reiterate that too. Thank you for working to find what would call that sweet spot for the percentage of what to use to balance that out. Good job. You've had your hands full trying to navigate through this, and thank you. You've really broken it down and done a good job from my perspective.
Okay. Any comments from anyone else here tonight on truth and taxation? Okay. Hearing none. Any other comments from the board? Any other questions for Peggy or Mrs. Frank or Mrs. Pepper or Mrs. Frank? Then we will move to approve this resolution for the final district. Let's start with a motion if we could, please. Thank you. We have a motion and a second for the amount listed on the board currently and as defined in the presentation from Peggy. Any final questions? Okay, this is a resolution, so we will do a roll call vote. Joe? Barb?
Yes.
Dustin?
Yes.
Jamie? Or Angie? That's
Yes.
mine. Bruce?
Yes.
Brianne? Myself, yes. Motion passes. Resolution passes. Thank you. Okay. And that is all we had for our special meeting, our Truth and Taxation meeting. We will adjourn this meeting. Any board members need a break before we immediately go into the regular board meeting?